Welcome to Unreal Silence. Tonight, you will hear the story of a forest that hides more than just trees. This is the story of the missing hiker and the cursed woods. The story begins on a cold autumn evening when four friends decided to explore a forest that locals always warned about. The villagers called it the Hollow Woods, a place no one entered after sunset. Daniel, the most adventurous of the group, carried his camera everywhere. He wanted to capture every moment of their hiking trip. He didn't believe in old legends or ghost stories. For him, the forest was just a forest until he stepped into it. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, only the crunch of dry leaves under their boots. The silence was so heavy that even their own breathing felt too loud. They laughed nervously, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. Every tree looked the same, tall and twisted, as if the forest itself was designed to confuse them. That night, they set up camp in a small clearing. Daniel placed his camera on a tripod, recording the firelight and their conversations. The friends tried to relax, telling jokes and sharing food. But when the fire began to die, the forest around them seemed to breathe. The trees groaned as if they were alive. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped, followed by a faint whisper carried by the wind. Daniel played the recording back later, and his hands shook. On the video, after the laughter faded, a low voice could be heard, clear and deliberate. It said only two words: "Go back." None of them had spoken those words. They tried to convince each other it was the wind. But when morning came, one of their group, Mark, was gone. His sleeping bag lay open, his backpack untouched. But there was no sign of him. They searched the area, calling his name, but the forest only returned their echoes. Daniel checked the camera again. What he saw froze his blood. In the middle of the night, while everyone was sleeping, the lens had captured a figure walking past the tent. It wasn't Mark. The shape was too tall, its limbs too long, and its head tilted unnaturally as it moved between the trees. That was the moment they realized they were not alone in the forest. And it was only the beginning. The disappearance of Mark changed everything. The remaining three, Daniel, Sarah, and David, stood in the clearing with pale faces, calling out his name again and again. But the forest swallowed every sound. No footsteps, no reply, no sign of him anywhere. His belongings lay untouched, as though he had simply vanished into thin air. Daniel kept replaying the camera footage, staring at the tall, crooked figure that had walked past their tent. He wanted to believe it was some kind of trick, light, shadow, or his own tired mind playing games. But deep down, he knew the forest was hiding something. Panic began to grow among them. Sarah suggested they pack their things and leave immediately. David agreed. No trip, no adventure was worth a missing friend. They gathered their gear in silence, too afraid to argue. The forest, however, had other plans. The trail they had taken the day before should have led them straight back to the dirt road where their car was parked. But after an hour of walking, they arrived at the same clearing where they had started. Confused, they tried again, this time marking trees with bright orange ribbons to guide their way. They walked for what felt like another hour, but when they stopped, they found themselves staring at the same ribbons they had tied earlier. The forest had folded in on itself, trapping them inside a loop. Fear turned into frustration. David cursed, kicking at the dirt, while Sarah held her head in her hands. Daniel kept filming, as if the camera was the only proof that this nightmare was real. He whispered to himself, "There has to be a way out. There has to." But his voice shook. As evening fell, the forest grew colder. The shadows between the trees lengthened, forming shapes that looked like figures watching from a distance. The three friends set up their tent again. Though none of them wanted to sleep, they sat close together, whispering, their ears tuned to every sound. The silence was no longer empty. It was heavy, filled with unseen eyes. Around midnight, Sarah gasped and pointed. At the far edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight, a shape stood still. For a moment, she thought it was Mark. The figure had the same height, the same build. Relief rushed through her chest, and she almost called his name. But something was wrong. The figure didn't move. It didn't breathe. It only stood, its head slightly tilted, watching them. David shouted, "Mark, is that you?" His voice echoed, but the figure remained motionless. Slowly, Sarah's relief turned to horror. Even from a distance, she could see that the figure's face was blank smooth, skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. She screamed, and Daniel swung the camera toward it, capturing the shadowy outline before the fire sputtered and died, plunging them into darkness. In the chaos, they scrambled to relight the fire. When the flames roared back to life, the figure was gone. Only the sound of heavy breathing echoed between the trees, though none of them could tell if it belonged to them or something else. The rest of the night passed in silence. No one dared to sleep. Daniel replayed the footage once more. This time, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The figure hadn't been standing still at all. Frame by frame, he could see it moving jerky, twitching movements closer and closer to the camera, until it stopped just short of the FIRELIGHT. By dawn, David had broken down. "We have to try again," he said. "We can't stay here. We'll die here." They set off once more, determined to escape. But no matter which direction they walked, the forest brought them back to the same clearing, the same trees, the same suffocating silence. It was then that Daniel noticed something even stranger. On one of the trees, carved deep into the bark, was a single word: "Stay." His hands trembled as he touched the letters. They were fresh, carved recently, the wood still raw. And yet, none of them had done it. As the second night approached, the forest grew even darker, as if the sun had been swallowed before its time. Sarah clutched Daniel's arm, whispering, "We're not supposed to leave. It won't let us." Her voice cracked with terror. That night, they didn't light a fire. They sat in darkness, hoping not to be noticed. But the forest noticed anyway. The whispers returned, soft and broken, circling the tent. Daniel held the camera close, recording every second. The whispers grew louder, layering over each other, like dozens of voices speaking at once. None of the words were clear, except one repeated again and again, in a chorus of hissing tones. "Stay, stay, stay." Then came the scream. David leapt to his feet, clutching his ears, his face pale as though he had seen something unspeakable. He ran into the darkness before Daniel or Sarah could stop him. His cries echoed through the trees, then cut off abruptly. Silence returned. Sarah collapsed in tears. Daniel's camera kept recording, shaking in his hands, capturing only the black void of the forest beyond. He whispered into the lens, "It's taking us one by one." And as the night dragged on, neither of them dared to sleep. The forest had claimed its second victim, and still it whispered, "Stay." The morning after David vanished was the hardest yet. Sarah refused to speak, her face hollow, her eyes staring blankly at the trees. Daniel tried to stay strong, clutching the camera as if it were his last connection to reality. The sun had risen, but its light did little to comfort them. Inside the forest, even daylight felt dim, as though the canopy above absorbed all warmth and hope. They packed their remaining supplies, though neither of them truly believed in escape anymore. Every direction still led them back to the same cursed clearing. But this time, something was different. As they wandered, Daniel noticed a faint trail, a narrow path, half hidden under fallen branches, as if the forest itself had tried to conceal it. With no other options, they followed it. The path twisted deeper into the woods, leading them to something unexpected, a cabin. It stood crooked and rotting, its wood blackened with age. Vines crawled up its walls like veins. The windows were broken, and the door hung slightly open, creaking with the wind. Sarah froze, her breath catching. "Who built this?" she whispered. Daniel lifted the camera, recording every detail. The sight of the cabin should have brought relief, shelter, maybe even answers, but instead it filled him with dread. It felt wrong, as though the building had been waiting for them. Inside, the air was colder, thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The floor groaned under their weight. On the walls, strange carvings stretched across every surface, symbols neither of them could understand, spirals and jagged lines, overlapping like a language not meant for human eyes. Bones, small and brittle, lay scattered in the corners, some wrapped in decayed cloth. Sarah gagged, covering her mouth. Daniel focused the camera on a wooden table in the center of the room. Upon it lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and stained. He opened it carefully. The writing inside was shaky, frantic, words scribbled over one another. The last legible entry read, "The forest chooses who stays. The forest decides when." The words made Sarah's knees buckle. She whispered, "We're never getting out, are we?" Daniel didn't answer. His silence was enough. As night approached, they had no choice but to remain inside the cabin. They barricaded the broken door with old furniture and huddled together in a corner. The camera light flickered, casting long shadows across the carved walls. That was when the whispering began again. This time, it wasn't outside. It was inside. With them, the voices rose and fell like the wind, though there was no wind at all. Some whispered in words they could almost understand. Others hissed in a language older than the forest itself. Sarah clung to Daniel, trembling. He tried to film every sound, every shadow. His lens shook as he turned toward the corner of the room and froze. There, in the dim glow of the camera light, stood a woman. Her back was to them, her body unnaturally still. Her hair hung long and wet, as though she had just emerged from water. Slowly, she began to turn, revealing a face that was pale, stretched thin, with empty black sockets where her eyes should have been. Sarah screamed, and Daniel dropped the camera. It hit the floor, the lens cracking slightly, but still recording. The woman didn't move closer. She only raised her hand and pointed at the carvings on the wall. The symbols began to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, as suddenly, as she appeared, she vanished. The whispers stopped. The forest outside grew silent again. But it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of something watching. Sarah collapsed, sobbing. Daniel picked up the camera with shaking hands. On the recording, her face was clear, sharper than what he had seen with his own eyes. And worse, the camera caught something else. Behind the woman, in the reflection of the broken window, there had been dozens of figures standing just outside the cabin, all faceless, all waiting. The two of them didn't sleep that night. They couldn't. They sat in darkness, listening to the faint creak of the cabin, waiting for the next sound, the next whisper, the next figure. And just before dawn, the door creaked open on its own, slowly, as though the forest was inviting them back outside. The cabin's door creaked open on its own, the hinges crying out into the dawn. Daniel and Sarah sat frozen, their backs pressed to the wall, unable to look away. The door swayed slowly, as though pushed by unseen hands. Beyond it, the forest waited, darker than it should have been at sunrise, the trees bending unnaturally close, their branches tangled like claws. Sarah whispered, "It wants us to leave." Daniel shook his head, his voice hoarse from fear. "No, it wants us to follow. For hours." They sat in silence, listening. The forest was no longer just still, it was breathing, with every gust of cold air that pushed through the cracks of the cabin. They felt as if the woods themselves inhaled and exhaled, watching, waiting. Finally, exhaustion forced them to move. Their supplies were nearly gone. Sarah's lips were cracked, her hands trembling from hunger and terror. They stepped outside, the ground damp beneath their boots though no rain had fallen. The trees seemed closer now, their twisted roots snaking across the earth like veins. As they walked, Daniel noticed something carved into one of the trunks. His breath caught. It was his name, his full name, cut deep into the bark. Beneath it was a date, tomorrow's date. He stumbled back, panic flooding his chest. "Sarah," he gasped, pointing. She covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "It already knows," when she whispered. Her voice cracked, but she couldn't finish the thought. The further they walked, the worse the forest grew. The air was heavy, thick like smoke. Whispers rose and fell, sometimes behind them, sometimes ahead, always just out of reach. The forest mocked them with its echoes. Sarah thought she heard David calling her name, but when she turned, there was nothing there. Daniel swore he saw Mark moving between the trees, but his face was wrong, skin stretched, eyes hollow. They stumbled back to the cabin before nightfall, but the safety it offered before was gone. Now, it felt like a trap. They huddled inside as darkness swallowed the woods again. Daniel checked the camera. He replayed the footage of the carvings, the faceless woman, the figures outside. He pressed pause, staring at one frame too long. His stomach sank in the reflection of the broken window. Among the faceless crowd, he saw himself, his own face blank, standing shoulder to shoulder with them. Sarah shook him, her voice trembling. "Daniel, stop watching it. It's not just recording, it's showing what will happen." But Daniel couldn't look away. That night, the whispers became screams. They surrounded the cabin, growing louder and louder until the walls seemed to vibrate. Sarah clutched her ears, rocking back and forth. Daniel tried to film, but the camera flickered violently, the lens fogging, the battery draining faster than it should. The carvings on the walls glowed again, pulsing brighter, faster, in time with the screams. And then, silence. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest, suffocating. Daniel whispered. It stopped, but Sarah's eyes widened with terror. She pointed at the window. Outside, the forest was alive. Dozens, maybe hundreds of figures surrounded the cabin, standing between the trees. Their bodies were twisted, their faces gone. They swayed slowly, in unison, as though pulled by the same invisible thread. Daniel turned the camera toward them. But the moment he did, every single figure snapped their heads toward him at once. The crack of bone echoed through the night. The camera shook violently as he stumbled back. Sarah screamed. The door began to rattle. as though something massive was pounding against it. The wood splintered. The carvings on the walls flared so brightly that the room was bathed in a red glow. And then Daniel heard it, his own voice, not from his throat, but from the whispers. They called his name, over and over, in his tone, his cadence, as if the forest had stolen it. He dropped the camera, falling to his knees. Sarah grabbed his shoulders, sobbing, "Don't listen. Don't let it in." But it was already inside. The door burst open, not with force, but slowly, deliberately, like an invitation. The faceless crowd stood outside, waiting. In the center of them was the woman with hollow eyes. Her pale hand reaching forward, Daniel picked up the camera again, his breath ragged. "If anyone finds this," he whispered, "don't come here. Don't ever come here. The forest doesn't let you leave." The recording shook violently as the shadows closed in. The last clear image was of Sarah being dragged into the darkness, her scream cut short, her body vanishing into the faceless crowd. The camera tumbled to the ground, pointing upward. Through the cracked lens, Daniel's reflection appeared in the broken glass of the window. Only this time, his face was gone, smooth, empty, a faceless shadow among the rest. And outside, the forest whispered its truth, louder than ever. "Stay, stay, stay." When the door burst open and the faceless crowd spilled into the cabin, Daniel's camera fell, its cracked lens pointing upward. The screams, the whispers, the shadows, everything blurred into chaos. But the camera did not stop recording, even as Sarah's voice was ripped away into the trees. Even as the pale woman's hollow eyes glowed like coals, the camera's single red light stayed on, blinking, unblinking, capturing everything. What happened next was never meant to be seen. The footage became fragmented, distorted. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor. Faces appeared and vanished in the walls of the cabin. For a moment, Daniel's own face appeared in the lens, terrified, sweat dripping down his brow. And then, in the blink of an eye, his features were gone, replaced by smooth, empty skin. His scream was silent. His mouth no longer existed. The recording went black. But the story did not end there. Weeks later, a group of search and rescue officers entered the hollow woods, sent to recover the missing hikers. They found no trace of Sarah, David, Mark, or Daniel. No tents, no clothes, no bodies. The only thing discovered was a broken camera, half buried in leaves outside the rotting cabin. Its battery was dead, but its memory card was intact. The officers who viewed the footage never spoke of it publicly. The official report claimed the hikers had been lost and presumed dead. But among themselves, whispers spread of what they had seen on that camera. Some said they resigned after watching it. Others never returned to work at all. One of the officers, late at night, confided to a friend over drinks. His voice shook as he spoke. He said that the last 30 seconds of the recording were the worst. At first, it was only Daniel's voice, hoarse, broken, desperate. "If anyone finds this," he said, his words trembling with fear, "don't come here. Don't follow the voices. Don't look into the trees. The forest doesn't let you leave." Then came the sound of heavy breathing. Right next to the microphone, the camera tilted, as though lifted by someone's hand. But Daniel was no longer in view. The lens swung upward, toward the treetops. That's when they saw it. Between the branches, a shape hung from the trees. Something vast, shifting, and alive. Not a man, not an animal. Something older than either. Its body was woven from the forest itself. Bark for skin, branches for bones, empty hollows where its eyes should be. It leaned close to the lens, as though staring directly at whoever would one day watch the footage. And in a chorus of stolen voices, male and female, young and old, it whispered one word: stay. The screen cut to static. That was the final recording. The officer's friend asked him, "What do you think happened to them?" To Daniel. To the others. The man only shook his head. He finished his drink, his eyes empty. "They're still there," he said. "Not alive, not dead, just part of it." And with that, the hollow woods returned to silence. But silence, as you now know, is never empty.